What's up, everybody? This is Frederick Douglass Bussey. I'm glad to have you back on a Friday afternoon. We're taping this live for another edition of the Power Lunch Podcast. I'm super excited to share with you my guest. If you've not yet had a chance to experience him, I think you're going to be really, really blessed and empowered by his story and by the things he has to share with us today. For those of you who are new to the podcast, if you're watching this on LinkedIn or on YouTube, make sure you comment below. If you're watching this on Facebook, give us a comment. Let us know. You can ask a question if you want to. I'm happy to throw those in live as well. We love the interaction. Give us a like, thumbs up, subscribe. We're going to be really excited to share this information with you today, and I think you're going to have an amazing show. So without further ado, we're going to get into it. Let's go. Power Lunch starts now. Welcome to Power Lunch. I realized I just did an entire intro on mute, so that was pointless completely. But that's the joy of live television, live audio, live streaming. So my name is Frederick Douglass Bussey, and I'm super excited to have with us today none other than Mr. Ben Ward. Ben is an accomplished author. He is a speaker and entrepreneur, and we're going to really dive into his story because I think he has a ton of value to share with us today. Please welcome with me Mr. Ben Ward. Ben, thanks for being on Power Lunch.
I'm super pumped to be here with you, man.
Awesome. For those who don't know you, please share with everyone exactly who you are and what it is that you do.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And, first off, I don't know if you could have scripted that any better, because as entrepreneurs, we might have a plan, right? And, we might give our very best, and you just crushed the intro. You're like passionate, and then it was on mute. And you can't script that any better, because that's the life of an entrepreneur at its very best. So I love it. My name is Ben, as Frederick mentioned. But I've spent the last 20 years working directly with sales leaders. Myself as a sales leader started building door-to-door sales teams 21 years ago, and learned a lot about how poor of a leader I am through just making tons and tons of mistakes, and then kind of learning a little bit better how to do things the right way. And I've spent the last 10 years, after leading teams myself for 10 years, I spent the last 10 years working with sales leaders to help them, really drive results with their teams through bringing out the very best in the people they lead.
I'm excited to have this conversation around sales because it's so central to business, but some of the things that I know that you talk about really have to do with who we are as human beings, how we think about leadership, sales, business, etc. I want to dive into that. But first, let's talk a little bit about who you are and where you came from. Where were you born? What was it like growing up as a child? And in those formative years, maybe share some of the things that became the foundation for who you are today.
Yeah, thank you. So when I was 5 years old, my mom came into my room and was like, "Ben, your dad and I are getting a divorce." And I was like, "Sweet. Like, when are we getting it?" Like, I had no idea what she was talking about. I thought it was like a camper. I thought like a divorce was like a camper or like some cool thing we were getting. And I had no idea how much that decision, that situation would shape my life. And I grew up, so there was 5 kids in my original family, and then my parents both remarried people who had kids, and so then there was my dad remarried a lady who had 4 kids, and then they had 2 together. And so when I was with my dad on the weekend, like every other weekend, there was 11 of us growing up, and yeah, and we were super poor. My dad was really successful in his business and lost everything in the mid to late 80s, and so we were just super poor. And I grew up sleeping on sleeping bags for years, like my all growing up. And then when I was with my dad, and then on when I was with my mom remarried an awesome guy who had 4 kids, and so bro, we had 15. There's 15 of us all together.
Wow, that's incredible. There's so many dynamics that I play there. One, I'm curious about your dad. What was his business, and the fact that he had so much success and he lost it all? What was it that you observed about him in the aftermath of that level of failure?
Woo! We're going there. I love it. So yeah, so my dad, he had a company called Fashion Sportswear, and from this in the 70s and 80s, they were the key manufacturers. They did all the sewing, they did all of the putting together of LA Gear and body glove back when they were just crushing it. I don't know if you remember those like pink and fluorescent jackets, you know.
I do.
Back in the 80s.
Yeah.
That was my dad. So his factory, he had factories, he had tons of huge factories. We'd go and visit, and there's just we would get all the gear you could possibly imagine as little kids. And when my parents got divorced, my dad was at the very top of his game, and he had a multi-million-dollar business, and he was just crushing it. And it wasn't until a few years later that he ended up unraveling and lost everything. So my early memory as a kid was just, we just had everything. And then my most dominant memory from when I was about 10 until an adult, man, we were just dirt poor.
Wow.
And so one of the lessons, so thank you for that question, because it brings some real, almost kind of gets into like a little spiritual mode, if you're okay with that.
Please.
My dad, years later, I was 23, and he shared something with me, and he said, Ben, I thought it was me. I'm like, all right, cool, Dad. It's like, what are you talking about? And he's like, the success I had with my business, I really thought it was me. I thought I was just super smart. I thought I was just the man. And it wasn't until a few years after everything started unraveling that I really learned something. And I bring this up in this conversation because you asked observing my dad and kind of watching him lose everything. And just like crazy life experiences that he had and that I viewed from a different angle, different lens as his son. And then my own life of how that affected me. He's like, I thought it was me. But what I didn't realize was when I stopped living true to myself and what I believed, to my conscience, and I started making it about other things and making decisions that I knew weren't, with my personal decisions, with some business decisions. And when I stopped living true in integrity, I was left to myself. And he attributed to a spiritual gift that was taken from him.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how old were you when you had this conversation with him?
I was 23.
So you had seen for years this kind of way, and from the outside, how did it seem like it affected him, or did it affect your relationship with him at all, with the family? Because that's a pretty precipitous fall. And we already know the entrepreneurial journey is up and down. It's an emotional roller coaster in a lot of ways. But to take that level, like how was his demeanor as a father and as a man afterwards? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So my dad. So you'd have to know my dad. He's a very very closed.
Mm,
Um, so I don't know him. I'm growing up. I didn't know him well, and there were
mm,
so many of us kids, and he had so much going on in his life that I had no idea. I'm
mm,
just going through my own journey, trying to figure out who I am, and I wasn't like thoughtful of like, my dad seems to have had like everything, and now he's lost everything. Like I never even thought of that. I just was living life, and you
mm,
know, I'd go visit him every other weekend, and I was clueless to his existence of like what he's experiencing.
mm,
And on top of that, he's very closed. Even now, I don't know him well, which I mean, I love him. He lives by himself to this day in Tecate, Mexico,
wow.
and and he he he's fine. He's reached peace in his life over the last 10 years. He has peace, but he lives a very very humble, frugal like situation. It's been so interesting to just experience as his son kind of his journey. And the biggest takeaway for me
Hmm,
is just a passion to live true. Like being able to see my dad experience what he did and make decisions he's not proud of,
hmm,
and and own up to them. And also, the world didn't swing back into his favor. He didn't crush it again in business. He became, I don't know him well enough to know if he really was like depressed, but
hmm,
his whole life just completely unraveled, and it's been a very, very so many lessons that I've learned, and one of the biggest ones
hmm,
is just the importance and the value of living true to what you believe. You're like your own individual, what you believe to be right, living
hmm,
true to that, and so I really try to guard myself to keep myself in check, to not get too prideful, right, and not get too arrogant,
hmm.
and 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 really try to honor the integrity that day by day.
I'm curious, because you mentioned you had this conversation with him at the age of 23, but so there's probably 12, 13 formative years in there that had some sort of impressions on you, even though you were in and out of the household. Was there anything that you kind of took away in terms of being an entrepreneur, not being an entrepreneur, playing it safe, being at risk? And I guess we could kind of contrast that with how you grew up in your household with your mother and your stepfather. But in terms of the foundation and maybe some thoughts that kind of formed in your head about how you wanted to live your life, how did that affect you?
Yeah. So on my dad's side, it was this. My dad's an entrepreneur, and then through his situation, he became muzzled. Like his gift, his superpower, like his gifts, he allowed those to like to just kind of be muzzled. And I
Mm,
just watched him. I just watched him struggle. Like not living into his purpose.
mm,
And then on the other side, my mom, she's a school teacher. And my dad, I call my dad too. I don't call him my stepdad. He's my dad as well. Dad Steve, and he worked for Sara Lee, and he delivered
mm.
bread.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and so they fought and they worked so hard, like every day. My dad Steve would get up at between 2 and 3 a.m. every day and go out and do his route, and he'd come home after we get back from school, and like it was just very hardworking, very safe, very.
Mm,
It was just it was very interesting to try to figure out, what my path was going to be.
hmm. So, did you take the traditional route and kind of go through high school and college and things like that, or did you start working too? What was the path for you?
So since I was 12, I started paying. I babysat, and I would do just odd jobs. I did door to door. I would sell things door to door. All the lemonade stands, everything you can imagine, and to just earn money.
Mm,
And so I paid for since I was 12, I paid for a lot of the things. And I can't discount. In my mind, I want to be like, I paid for everything since I was 12. But my parents, they worked hard to make sure we had the basic, needs. And when it came to like yearbooks and those things, I was on my own to figure out how to pay for that stuff. And I sold candy. So I would go to Costco. Back then it was called Price Club, and I'd go to Price Club and I'd buy these boxes of candy and I'd sell them. And I was known as the candy man at school. And I'd have a backpack full of candy and I would just sell it and earn money that way. But not funny, sad story. One day, all of my candy got stolen out of my backpack.
Whoa.
And we weren't allowed to sell candy. Like, you weren't allowed to do at school what I was doing, but I just was fighting to figure it out. Right. And I got back from recess and I looked at my bag and it was all gone. It was all the money I had in there was gone. And I just started bawling. And my teacher's like, what's going on? And I didn't know what to do other than just to tell her. And she was so compassionate, even though I wasn't supposed to be selling candy. And I'll never forget her compassion. But I was headed somewhere else with this. I got derailed.
So how old were you when that happened?
I was in 6th grade when that happened.
Man, yeah, that's tough. Because, so I can just imagine, right? You've built this thing up, it's working, right? And there's an emotional attachment to success when a thing is working, right? And we're making money, we're accomplishing our goal, and then have it ripped away. It's ironic that after your father had experienced that, you kind of had a similar experience in the 6th grade, right? So you're doing these odd jobs. You have this sort of hustler / entrepreneurial streak that you got going on. As you graduated high school, was college the next step, or what kind of happened from there?
Oh yeah. So after high school, I went and I served for my church. I went for 2 years out to knock doors and like teach people about Jesus.
Okay.
And do service. And so I did that for 2 years as a volunteer, not paid. In fact, my family sacrificed. My mom and my daddy, Steve, sacrificed everything to pay my way. It ended up over 2 years. It cost $10,000 over a 2-year period, a couple $100 a month to like fund this like missionary thing. So I did that, and I learned. That's when I learned some real like grit on how to work hard and how to overcome like massive fear when like people are like slamming doors at you and like, get out of here, like guns to my face. Like, what are you doing over here? Like, you're here to teach me about Jesus. What do you know about Jesus? Like, get out of here. Like that type of stuff. Right.
Wow. Yeah. So I'm a minister's son. Right. And so I kind of have had similar experiences. And it's funny because you mentioned the fact that, and I will kind of get into that, how you taught sales teams going door to door, but your initial process, when you're leaving the houses, was that, what were some of the lessons that you learned from that door to door experience? Did you develop more fearlessness, or did it make you more kind of skittish?
Yeah. One of the biggest things I learned is that people don't reject, like at first I felt like I'd take it personal. They're rejecting me. Like, I'm here to help you. I'm here to like share a message, or, hey, like, can we help mow your lawn? Like, what can we do to serve you? Like, what, that. And at first it was like a personal, like when people weren't responsive, kind of took it personal. But then I started learning, you know what? It's not about me. It's about them. And like, of course they're going to reject. They're not rejecting me, Ben Ward, as a person. They're rejecting they're busy. Like they don't have time for me. They have their own worries and families and things that they have going on. And they're like the message, they might have their perception of what my message might be. And they're just, they like, I'm like a little bit, because they don't know me, I'm intruding on their situation. Like, for all they know, I'm here to steal their time for sure. steal maybe their money, maybe steal something from their house, maybe they don't know. And so there's an automatic guard that is naturally up. When you go and like try to connect with somebody that you don't know, they don't know you. And so I learned, one of the biggest things I learned was like an ability. How do you quickly connect with somebody? You're not going to connect with everybody. And the timing for some people, even if you could connect with them, the timing might be off. It's not going to work. But a persistent commitment to really try to serve, to really try to be helpful. And I learned the biggest key was to drive results, to even allow somebody to allow you to help them. You've got to quickly create some trust. You got to quickly create rapport. And that's all well said. And like, it's easy to say, but how do you actually do it? Right. And from thousands and thousands of situations and knocking doors, talking to people, you start learning like how to connect with people. And I think that was a foundation that really 100% took some of those principles and skills and allowed that to move into the business world in the future.
So I'm curious then, what's one maybe tip or principle that you learned to quickly connect with people and build that level of trust?
Yeah, first thing is when somebody started throwing out a concern, like at first I'd be like sort of thrown off, like, oh, I don't have time. Then they're like closing the door and you're like, and they close it and you like walk away. One quick thing that I learned, it took me a while to like learn this and refine it, but one tool was just a simple shift. When somebody's like, I don't have time for this. I'm like, yeah, of course not. Yeah, of course not. And you align with them. And so there's a temptation to want to push. Well, I don't have time. Well, if you knew what we're doing, you would have time. Like, and then slam, right? Oh, I don't have any money. I can't do. Oh, well, no, it's not money. No, you don't need any money, and slam, right? Like, oh, like I'm not interested in what you have. Well, I think you might be when you try to push, like that goes nowhere fast. One little thing that I learned in the trenches was like, hey, I'm really not interested. Yeah, of course not. Like, and just like aligning with them, and they're like, huh? And it just buys you a little bit of time to because you have to be able to like keep the door open a little bit to be able to have anything, to have the seed even potentially grow. And so the principle I'll share with those that are listening, just plant in your brain like an automatic response that of course they're going to have that whatever objection they have that they're saying. Of course they're going to say that. And you don't want to like give it too much energy yet, because it's probably a smokescreen. Right. It's probably like they're just throwing something out at you to get rid of you. And just showing up, knowing that they're going to give you a smokescreen because they want to get rid of you, just knowing that and being okay with it and not taking it personally, be like, all right, whatever they throw at you. Hey, I don't have the money. Yeah, no problem. Like, and you keep going. Like, it's like almost like, of course you don't. Like, of course you're going to bring that up. And if you don't mind, can I share a short little story to illustrate this a little bit?
Please, yeah.
So my son, McKay, let me see if I have a picture. Here, let me show you. I'll show you a picture if it's cool. I'll show you a picture of my son, McKay. So here's McKay. Here we go. This little guy right here, little champ. And that's my family, my wife, Sherry, and my daughter, Miley, who's 13, McKay's 9, and Emery's 7. Okay. So McKay, he's playing in the toy room, and we have a little playroom, and his friend Liam comes walking in, and Liam's about to come play, and McKay's playing with this fire truck, and he's like going with it. And I'm curious, Frederick, what toy do you think Liam wanted when he walked in that room?
He wanted the fire truck.
Man, he wanted that fire truck. And so I watched this and it was just crazy and I watched McKay playing with the fire truck and Liam coming in and be like, McKay, can I have that? Can I play with that? And McKay's like, no, oh, no. But then McKay's is like, he's a good kid. He's like, oh, here, Liam, here's the Tyrannosaurus Rex. Here, play with that. And Liam's like, no. And he's like, oh, here's the lawnmower. Like, here, you can be the lawnmower. Well, here's the police car. And I watched this, and they started getting into this fight where Liam's like, no, I want the fire truck. And McKay's like, no, I don't want. And then they're like fighting over the fire truck. And what I've found in sales and in business is that the salesperson comes in and, they want the fire truck from the customer, from the potential. They want to know they want to get the sale, and they want to and so there's this battle, right? And what I've found is that every customer has the dominant reason to avoid buying, and they don't give that out. There's they'll give out the stuff they don't really care about. Here's the Tyrannosaurus Rex. Here's the lawnmower. They'll give that. Oh, I don't have time. Oh, I don't have money. Oh, I don't. But the real truth, the key to sales and really being able to lead a sales team is helping your salespeople be able to be the people that people can trust and actually authentically you actually have to care about the people you serve. You can't fake it. We're intuitive. A salesperson's ability to uncover the truth, to get the fire truck and allow the customer to give you the real reasons why, their dominant reason to avoid buying, to get that fire truck. I learned early on, my goal was not to sell people. My goal was to see if I could have a communication where they can understand what it is I'm selling and what it is. And if I could match a need, if I could get them to open up and help me to understand their truth, that's when my sales went from zero, from almost fired from a straight commission job, to earning my first $1 million while I was in college, leading sales teams, by really committing to authentic communication being the goal versus the sale being the goal.
Well, Ben, that's so true. That's so powerful, what you just shared with people. First of all, the story about the fire truck, right? I mean, everybody can relate to that. And then just the counterintuitive way of keeping people to hold the door open just long enough so you can really grab their attention and really start to build that process. Let's talk about how you got into sales, because in a way, what you were doing door to door was you were kind of selling Jesus, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And so people I don't care what you're selling. It doesn't matter if you're selling, eternal life, or if it's fire insurance. I don't care. I don't want it. But you took that process, and there were some principles and things that you learned. What happened next? You finished your 2-year missionary period. What was the next step?
Yeah. So my friend went out. I got home from my mission, and my friend, he made $10,000. He made 10 grand in a summer. And I was just like, bro, if he can do it, I could do it. Because I mean, I enjoyed knocking doors. The challenge of it is the hardest thing I knew how to do. And so I'm like, I'm in, let's go. And so I went out for my first summer, and my parents, like my mom and my daddy, Steve, were like, don't do it. Like, just, if anything, do summer school, get ahead in school. Right. And I respect their opinion. And my first 2 weeks, I alluded to this a little bit. My first 2 weeks, I went out and I sold zero. And I was the dead last. I was the worst in an office of 30, and almost fired. My boss, my manager, Jared Taggart, who's a dear friend to this day, he sat me down. I'll never forget. I was on a curb, and he's like, hey, sat me down on a curb. He's like, hey, listen, this isn't for everybody. And there would be no shame in, if you decided to pack up and straight commission, I'm not earning anything. I'm working my guts out. The same work ethic that I was selling Jesus. I was out there, that same work ethic all day. And my parents at that time were like, come home. You got a room here. You got your old job back. I was working at Sports Chalet in California, stringing tennis rackets for $7 an hour. And like, you got your comfy job back, right? And so I just decided, I was like, listen, I'm just, I went for a big run in Oceanside, by Oceanside Beach and Oceanside Pier. And when I went for the run, I'm crying. I'm like bawling. My car was broken down. I didn't have money to fix it. I borrowed $100 from my friend, Trevor, who's my roommate. He had $100 and $1 bills in his sock drawer. And he let me borrow it because he knew I wasn't eating. I was doing some top ramen, but I was out of food. It was just crazy. And so like the whole world was crying out to me, Ben, just quit. Like my parents who love me, like just come home. Like, all around me, the elements, even a black widow at that time. I was up on a bed. I was up on it was another story. I'll tell a long story later, but another time. But I was around this time, I like hopped up a fence, and it was like an 8-foot fence. And I was like way up there and like right next to my pinky. Like there was a black widow that was right there, and I flew back and I fell back and I landed on my back, and I'm just like, I'm out of money. My car doesn't work. I'm not selling. And I'm just like the world, my parents, the people I respect, my finances, my car, all the way to the black widow, like are like, Ben, just stop. Go back to your life that's very safe, very, very humble. And bro, something inside of me was just like, no, I can do this. And I just kept showing up. I showed up the next day, and that summer, bro, I ended up turning it around and I ended up making $25,000 that summer.
Wow. What were you selling?
Home security.
Wow. I've actually had a chance to do some of that myself, so I understand how tough that can be. So you persevered through that. You made the $25,000. Was that when it started to click for you that, hey, maybe I can do something with this? Or was it, let me try something else?
Yeah. At the end of the summer, I was done, like forever. There's no way I'm ever doing that again. And then I went back to school, and I did a whole year of school. And we have Beth. Very true. It's very difficult to do a successful thing with a confused mind. Love that, Beth. Thank you. So I went back to school, and I was never going to do that whole thing again. It was so hard. But I earned enough to pay for school, and I earned enough to pay for a new car. And it got me through. And then they recruited me back the next year, right before the summer. And I decided, you know what? I did. And so that next summer, I helped to manage a team. And bro, I ended up doubling what I earned. I made $50,000 that next summer, which was, bro. Yeah. I mean, I made more that year than my daddy Steve made. And it just was like crazy. And then, the pull was strong for me to stay in school. So after that second summer, I went back to school, did another year, and kept going. And then I went out the third summer, doubled that. I made $100,000 running a team. Then I dropped out of school to my parents. They were like, no, don't do it. But I did. I'm like, so I went all in, and that next year I made $286,000. Then the following year I kept building. I'm building teams and regions, and now I have a pretty large region. I had 9 managers. Each of them had 30 sales reps, and my role was to just equip the managers to really succeed with their teams and duplicate myself, get leverage results through that. And I ended up making over $400,000 that next year. And so this trajectory that, I'd earned $1 million while I was in school. Even though I dropped out, I was a senior, and it was through the, extreme struggle and figuring out how to make things work, and the growth and the pains and from there I launched a company with 5 years after I started doing the doors. I grew every year. Then I started a company called Elevate with the owner of the company I worked for, who helped me to succeed up to that point. We recruited 2,000 sales reps. We took the company public in 2010, and we just had this epic. And I was like 30 years old, kind of like sort of done. Like, I mean, we're in the trenches working our business hard, but financially, my business was worth a ton of money. And it's interesting how it's easy to get sucked into the pride and being like, oh yeah, like I'm pretty amazing, aren't I? Right?
Yeah.
And what happened not long after, a few years into this, we had this publicly traded company. We had sales reps all over America. We had this rad bundled service we were doing, phone, internet, TV, and security, all IP based. It was back in 2010, 11, 12, that time period where it wasn't common. We're blazing a trail, and I ended up, through my recklessness, driving that business into the ground.
Wow. Let's dive into that a little bit, because the thing that was coming up for me was, and it's interesting that was the result, is that you had watched your dad kind of, even from afar, kind of had a similar experience, right? He had all the success. In the midst of that conversation you had with him when you were 23, did that ever resonate in the back of your mind? Do you feel like that was ever kind of bouncing around in there, and especially when things kind of tanked or hit that slide for you? Did that come up again, that conversation?
It did, and that's thank you, man. You're so rad. I love your thoughtfulness and your questions. I had to conquer a fear early on that, and it's, I mean, I don't know. You asked me if anything's off limits, or before I think we started. I mean, anything off limits? Can I share some stuff, even if it kind of goes spiritual a little bit?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so I had this fear growing up that I was going to be just like my dad, and don't get married. So I had this major fear of getting married because I was going to just be this like jerk to my wife, and I grew up and I didn't want that, and so I had this fear, these walls up, and something that helped me, and this is directly related to what you're asking me about the business, the conversations in my mind about I just lost everything, like now you're going to be like your dad for the rest of your life, and I'd already conquered a couple things, and one of them was this. I remember learning about Jesus, and I remember learning that and Isaiah talks about, he's a root out of dry ground. And I'm like, what does that even mean? For years I thought about, I don't even know what that means, but Isaiah, this is the prophet in the Bible, talks about, that Jesus was a root out of dry ground, and meaning, one of the things I came to learn of what that means is that his ancestry, he came from a pretty wicked line where, you had King David was really righteous, whatever, and then he was dethroned. He ended up becoming a murderer, adulterer, all these different things. And he that was the line that Jesus came from. And his soil, he didn't come from this great thing. He came from a broken, royal line where, and so I learned that, and I'm just like, wait a minute, that's Jesus. What about me? I come from a broken situation. Does that mean that that's who I'm going to be? And when I had that connection that Jesus was a root out of dry ground, and you know what? He did it. I want to try to follow. I want to not be, I don't want to I'm not predestined to fall into my dad's footsteps. And I rejected those thoughts. And I was like, no, I reject that. I'm going to do something better. I'm going to live a life that I'm personally proud of. And so that was years before, as a late teenager, when I'm trying to figure out who I was. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to allow these thoughts to condemn me to having a life like my dad has had.
Right.
And so when these things happened, when I started losing my business, I'd already kind of learned how to navigate that conversation in my mind, because you better believe it. And you nailed it. The conversation, the FUD, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt was real. I can't, I lost my house at this time, my business, I drove it to the ground. I couldn't make payroll. 2,000 salespeople across America. I lost my home. Home foreclosed on. We had a brand new baby, Miley. I showed you the picture of my oldest, Miley. She was a brand new baby at that time, and couldn't pay groceries. My car was ripped out of my garage. That was being foreclosed on, the house, and we were about to, and then my wife's car. Where it really got real for me was when my wife's car was taken and repossessed, and we were left with nothing. And I'm just like sitting there, like, you can only imagine. I mean, I'm sure we all have our experiences, right? They don't all look exactly the same, but there's a lot of, similar threads through, I think most of our journeys, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's deeply affecting. I'm thinking about how it is as a man, right? We have this image of ourselves as being protectors and providers. You've done it. You've built this business. It's nationally successful. It's gone public, and then all of a sudden things get ripped away. Let's talk a little bit about what led to that demise of that situation. You said your own recklessness. You drove it into the ground. What's the story with that?
So what we had a pipeline into the home,
Mm-hmm.
meaning we had teams all over. It was powerful, some of the best on the planet of knocking doors and actually serving customers and creating an authentic experience that actually was awesome. We had this rad thing going, and where the recklessness came in is I learned firsthand that the main thing in business is to keep the main thing the main thing.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we hear that, we know that, but I learned that firsthand because what happened was we had a bundle. We had phone, internet, TV, and security. Mm-hmm. And what started happening was we were like, we got hot shot mentality. We're like, oh. And so we started being like, the hard part is driving the pipeline into the home to serve the customer. That's the hard part. We've got that on lockdown. The easy part would be to fuel and fund different initiatives. So we had those 4 products, and then we're like, well, people would come to us and be like, hey, we like random things. We will give you money at this time we had the subprime real estate crash. The economy was doing this for years, but our business was born at the very start of the great economic crash of 2008. That's when we started it, but we didn't let that stop us. We had our funding dried up. We had $5 million in funding that dried up early, right when we started. But we just were like, that's okay. We'll sell our way out of it. And so, but what happened was we needed funds. So when people would approach us and be like, hey, we'll give you X amount of dollars if you'll add our product to your pipeline. So we're like, cha-ching, like, yes, that's going to help us navigate. And so we took money and we raised money and we started doing these different things, even going public. So before I even say that, like adding, like every product we added to our pipeline diluted our operational ability to fulfill a high level of service. Right? Okay. So we started getting diverted. We started getting diluted. And there's only so much time, energy that we have in a day. And our operations team started getting very, very heavy. And we just started, it was very expensive. We added more and more people, and we didn't figure out the operational way to deliver a great experience, because it's like a tree that's the branches outgrow the trunk, and it corrupts the whole tree. Yeah. And so from that, the other piece to this is taking the company public was actually a cash play and to earn money, which was great. But here's the problem. Talk about dilution of efforts and energy. Now we're running a publicly traded company, which we have no business being in, and the main thing is keeping the main thing. And we let all the branches that we allowed to grow overpower the trunk. And it ended up just corrupting and blowing up our entire tree.
Did you ever, in the midst of that run, did you ever sense that you were doing the wrong thing, but just were hoping that you could get out of it? Or was it just a blind spot that you never saw until basically you slammed into the wall?
Yeah, one of the biggest threats for entrepreneurs early on is having big success early on without realizing how that like it's almost like if you're gonna sink a battleship, like like the temptation is, well, I see the ship out there, and so like I'm gonna deploy all my cannonballs. And one of the worst things you can do early on is hit an uncalibrated cannonball. It's like you like, and it hits, and then all of a sudden you think you're invincible. And you're like, well, then you have another opportunity, and you're like, well, that's it. I see it. We're gonna crush that, and you deploy all your energies out with all your cannonballs. And so an uncalibrated cannonball is a real problem, and that's for me that I never thought. To your question, I never thought I was doing something wrong. I thought, like, no, this is what it takes. This is, and it wasn't until going through my own experience how important it is to calibrate, to like shoot little bullets. When I say calibrate, I mean like shoot little bullets, dink, or like bullets, miss, dink, miss. You got to be careful when you hit, when it's like dink, dink. Oh, you hit it, you dinked it twice. You got to be careful. Like you got to like really calibrate that you got to calibrate it towards like, what, and then you deploy the cannonball. And I did the opposite of that. I'd already hit on a couple other things. So I'm like, oh yeah, pipeline into the home, no brainer. Like, and I felt like I was serving a lot of people and doing good things. And it's just, when I say reckless, I really mean that. It was just sending all of my energy, asset, every single thing I have out into my cannonball, trying to like sink that battleship to get that result. And it missed. And it was all those energies out in the middle of the ocean.
So when you finally, everything blew up, did the company go under completely? What happened as a result?
Yeah, it ended up 5 years into it. I ended up resigning from my partnership, and my partner and I, we didn't see eye to eye. I wanted to stop and just scale organically. That was my passion. Like, we're hurting too many families. This is like, hurting our own families for sure, but way more valuable than that is all of these people that trusted us. We're leading them off a cliff, and like, we've got to stop. And my partner was I was lucky to be partnered with him. He's an incredible mentor and hero. By the way, he's gone on now to earn billions of dollars he's just amazing. And, but our business then, I left the partnership. That business took a few years to fully unravel. And then he ended up losing everything, having a crazy story. He picked himself back up, invested in Bitcoin back when it was under $100. And anyway, that's a whole nother story, but like, and he's been in the crypto space, killing it. He has one of the top, anyway, so there's that whole thing, but we didn't see eye to eye. He wanted to just keep going big. I wanted to just be more conservative, just slow down and like really just become more tight. And then when that didn't happen, I couldn't affect change in that conversation over a 6-month period. I ended up resigning and left. And I'll share one other key insight that helped me get through that. Because at that time in my life, this was 11 years ago now, I look at that as Black Death. And I say that because it's like I was sitting in tar, this black pool of tar that I'm sinking. This is how I felt. And I'm sure many can relate in your time of life, of different times where it's just so hard, whether that's, health, financial, relationships, emotional, maybe it's like depression, like deep depression. I was sitting in this state where everything unraveled. And you better believe my dad's story of like, you're destined for this. And I'm just like sitting in this FUD state. My book is called Pluck the Fud, right? Like, and we can talk about that if there's time. But like I was sitting in this FUD state, sinking as I felt in this black death of tar, and I couldn't see a future. And this little thought came to me that changed my life, Frederick. And bro, there's not a day since that this hasn't like given me encouragement. In that time, I'm like sinking in this tar, and I'm like blaming God, like, where in the heck are you? Like, you abandoned me. Like, and this like the scripture from Matthew in the Bible came to my mind, like, my burden is light. And I'm just like, no, it's not.
This is heavy.
Yeah. And this little thought came to my mind. It's like, okay, Ben, like I hear you, like, but let me share something with you. Is what this thought was had. So my burden, you're sort of misunderstanding this. My burden is not light, as in less heavy, light. Like Jesus's cross was never like, oh, this is light. It was excruciating. It was so hard and heavy, we can't even comprehend it. Like, and this little spirit came to my brain, which is like, my burden is light, as enlightenment, or like knowledge, like the things that we go through bring us light, or they bring us that our minds awake to we grow. And like without that, like we know the strongest steel, it has to go through the hottest fire. That thought in my brain of like blaming and like victim mindset of like, God, you did this to me, like shifted with this little revelation of like, oh, the things we go through, this is one of them. This is so hard for me. This will bring light unto my soul, that like, which is the most valuable thing that I can gain on this earth right now. And that was a wake-up call to help pluck out those thoughts of despondency and being like, you know what, somehow this will serve me. And it brought a realness to what Napoleon Hill talks about, that I believed in, and I taught my sales teams always. Every failure brings with it a seed, a tiny seed that has an equivalent advantage. If you let that seed grow, the seed of failure can grow into a redwood of opportunity. I learned firsthand that I believed it, and I knew that this epic failure, if I keep showing up and don't fall into my dad syndrome of being like, oh, I'm just going to be like my dad. But no, if I step up, I can turn this massive failure into a huge opportunity.
So, I mean, I think first of all, that's a powerful, powerful thought and powerful insight. And what it kind of brings to mind for me, and I'd love to hear your reflection on it, is just that, there are things in us as entrepreneurs, as human beings, period. But there are things in us that, call them a flaw, blind spot, whatever the case may be, that are actually limiting our ability to succeed. And it is failures that reveal those things so that we can work our way through. And I love to talk about the burden is light, right? So the circumstance, the failure, the devastation kind of pushes you to figure it out. You have to ask yourself, what did I do wrong? Where did I take the wrong turn? What's going on? And when we're blaming other people and blaming other things, it doesn't help us to focus on figuring out where the blind spot is or that limitation. And so that's where what I'm getting from you is that's where the blessing in the failure is, that the failure helps you to focus on what's broken, what's missing, what's keeping us in resistance to allow ourselves to be fully successful, to be fully in our purpose, whatever the case may be. I love to hear your thoughts on that.
Oh man, yeah. I'm curious from you. So let me ask you this: how much? I don't even know how long we've been talking. Are we good? What's our time frame? Are we good here?
No, I got to be respectful of your time. Yeah. So I mean, this is the beauty of it being my show. We can go as long or as short as we need to. So
Okay.
if you got a few more minutes, then we can take that for sure. Because I do want to talk about your book a little bit as well, so people can
Sure.
understand about that.
Yeah. Absolutely. So with that, say that again. Help me. I want to make sure I have a really clear thought.
So it's just that there's things inside of us a lot of times, whether it's a limiting belief, whether it is a habit, whether it is some sort of generational conditioning, whatever it is, things that we've just learned, bad habits growing up, whatever. And so they lead us to fail because I don't want to call it the right way to do something, but there are better ways to be successful. And sometimes we're the ones, usually it's us that's getting in the way. It's a way we're doing it, a way we're thinking, whatever. So sometimes a failure happens, and the failure forces us to deal with the stuff that's going on that's keeping us from being successful, right? And if we, like, I loved how you said that some of the worst things you can do sometimes as an entrepreneur is to succeed right away because you never deal with the stuff. And so it only makes the failure that much bigger down the road because you believe, like, kind of like your dad said, right? Yeah, it was me. I was the whole reason why we won, right? But we never want to take responsibility when we lose. And it's not until we take responsibility for the failure that we can learn the lessons that the failure has to teach us. I think that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. I'm pumped to share this thought with you because, kind of even the way that I shared with you early on and you picked up on it, it says a lot about just your greatness, man. But when I'm like, hey, I wrecked my company through my recklessness. Like, I don't say that like as like a trophy, like, oh, like I say that through I didn't think I was reckless. Like I actually didn't believe that. And for a long time I held on to how this was not my fault. Until I gave that away and said, you know what? And like I created that result. Now there's tons of outside situations and circumstances that happen, but until I really accepted actual ownership, I mean, like that was like I epically failed hard, and it hurt a lot of people until I'm able to till I was able to actually like believe that and accept that and like actually have that like reflect on what happened and be like, you know what, I made some mistakes, and not as a shaming, blaming, but as a, okay, well, failure is an opportunity to more intelligently begin again, right? And
I love that.
yeah. And so it wasn't until I released that victimhood that I became free. And, by owning our failures, like, Rockefeller said something pretty cool. I'll botch it a little, but he's like, how fortunate when young men and women experience extreme failure, making big mistakes early in their life. Count that person blessed. And you don't see it when you're going through it. You don't see it as a blessing. Like
no, definitely not. I imagine that the process of getting to that level of acceptance had to be kind of painful. Did you ever experience any shame, guilt, whatever? And if you did, how were you able to kind of navigate out of that to really land at the place where you could take responsibility, really learn the lessons, and then make the pivot from there?
Yeah, shame for sure. Shame, blame, myself. It's a pretty lonely place where you can't take care of your family, let alone all the people you've got on the bus with you. And so, I mean, my confidence was shot for a while. There's people at my church that worked for me for my company. Wow. That was hard. Like in the halls, they were great. I mean, I have great relationships, but like in my heart, like I'm this successful guy that's just lost everything, put them through the ringers, hurt their families, and like the church, the hallways of the church were a pretty like sad place for me. The conversations that would go through my brain about who I am and like what I've done to these families. You better believe there's a lot of shame. And what helped me get through it was a willingness to like have the needed hard conversations. And when I was feeling, a certain way, or I felt like there was a cross-eyed look, and I felt like, that I really tried to make sure to like confront those head on and be like, hey, and I'm pretty, life will visit humbleness upon you. So I've kind of in those stages, I'm very humble of like, I'm sorry. And being able to like work through those conversations to learn that I had way more support from people that had followed than I believed. And like these people that I like felt like they should be like really like have animosity towards me, like being willing to sorry, I just got thrown off. My friend Kathy Roberts actually is calling. She's the president of Discover Bank. The previous, she's incredible. I work with their sales. Anyways, they have my mind just diverted for a second.
It's okay.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay. So, I mean, in the process, having those difficult conversations with people, right? You found freedom in that, the liberation to kind of release that guilt and shame. Is that kind of what happened?
Yeah. And then just working hard. And I made a commitment to pay everybody back personally that I knew. It took me 7 years to like personally pay people back. I had friends and family that as things were unraveling, they were like helping me out because of course I was going to be able to figure it out. And so it took me 7 years after my Black Death, the tar pit, the time period, to like come out and get out of debt. And through that, like living in integrity and like, paying people back that really, I didn't like need to. Some people invested in stock. One of the situations I learned how to like take my stock and I paid rent because then we started renting a different house and we paid rent through stock. Figured out how to do that. I bought a car through stock. Ryan Hall, they sold us their 10-year-old Escalade so we could have a nice car that was like, and he bought it in stock and that stock went to the ground. So within 7 years, I ended up paying him back all of the money it was stock. It was a risky thing, but like those type of things living in, for me, it was like, I felt like I wanted to live. Like I could have been okay to not pay certain people back and it would have been fine and it would never be a problem, but really trying to operate in what I felt was integrity. Those are the things for me that have given me that extra strength and confidence to just climb and keep going, which has led me to where I'm at today.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I want to talk about the next step, the next chapter where you built your next business, but I also want to talk about the book, right? You wrote this book called Pluck the Fud. Pluck the Fud. Say that 3 times without stumbling. Yeah.
Yeah. Be careful, right?
And you alluded to what FUD is a little bit earlier, but maybe somebody missed it. Talk about the book and what led you to write it. What is FUD? And what's the core idea of the book?
Yeah, so 20 years leading sales teams and mentoring tens of thousands of sales leaders. I've learned the number one blocker, the thing that blocks most sales, most outcomes, the results that we're trying to pursue. The one thing is FUD. And because like the easy part is learning the skills to be successful. Mm-hmm. That's easy. Like how to, the questions to ask, how to stand, your pitch, your tone, the verbal, nonverbal communications, how to go in, how to like start the approach, how to go in for the close. All those things are learnable. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You can duplicate them. You learn from those. Like that's the easy part. Right. The hard part is learning to guard your mind. Mm. When you're in the tar pits of your life, right? Learning to guard your mind and take action despite fear. Yeah. And so pluck the FUD. If you're growing a garden, weeds are going to creep into the garden, right? Mm-hmm. You got to pluck the weeds out of the garden, right? You got to get them out of there. our minds are the exact same. We might have a beautiful idea. We're gonna like crush it. We're gonna double our sales in the next, this next year, and inevitably weeds of the mind are gonna creep in. And the most common weeds are fear, uncertainty, and doubt, or FUD. And you've got to pluck the FUD. And this book it took me 5 years to write this thing every day for whether 20 minutes to 2 hours every single day for 5 years, to put the best advice I've personally learned, applied myself, and taught on how. Like, it's one thing to know about plucking the FUD. Okay, that's cute. It's another thing, how do you do it? Like, what do you do when the weeds come? What are the tools? What are the practical strategies to pluck the FUD, to get yourself to take action to get results?
Yeah, that's super powerful. Learning how to weed your mind, right?
Boom.
I love it. I love it. Let's wrap up this whole arc of this journey, to kind of tell people where you are now. The business tanked. You walked away from it. It tanked after you walked away, but you're in this pit of despair, I'll call it, and then you start to climb out, right? So over the next 7 to 10 years, what is it that happens? How do you pivot and start your next business and end up where you're at today?
So I learned through my journey, I learned where my genius zone is. My genius zone is really helping sales leaders, helping them create highly impactful results with their team. So helping sales leaders drive results with their teams is where I'm really good at. A lot of the operational stuff, some of them I have some expert zones. I'm expert at certain things, but Frederick, one thing I've learned, if there's a truth bomb I could share as we sort of close out, your biggest threat to your genius zone, your biggest threat to operating in genius is your expert zones. The things you're really good at, the things you have experience in, the things that you could do and do really well. And so people approach you, hey, can you help? The biggest threat to your genius, and genius, I mean, what fuels you. It's like the hedgehog concept from Good to Great. It's like something you're passionate in, can fuel your economic engine, something you can become the best in the world at. Your genius zone is something that you love to do, you're really good at, and you're at your natural best. And for me, developing leaders and even niching down specifically even more sales leaders, and for me, I learned that I'm kind of like a sales leadership safari guide. I've been there. I've navigated the sales and leadership jungle. I've succeeded. I've fallen. I've up and down the roller coaster. I've been there, and I've come back for you.
I'm forgetting the name. I was trying to think of the name of the Bring 'Em Back Alive. There used to be a TV show, and he would go out and it's a safari, and so that's kind of what you are. You're the Bring 'Em Back Alive guy of sales. Yeah,
and specifically for leaders. So somebody is leading a team. If you're leading a team, I'm the guy that can really help you drive incredible results with that team.
So let me ask you, as we are getting close to wrapping up, what is a principle, a key principle, or a foundational insight that sales leaders, and maybe even just the leaders, people who are building teams, because we have entrepreneurs and maybe they're a solopreneur, they want to build a team, or maybe they're listening and they have a team and they're trying to figure out, how do I navigate leading them? What is a foundational principle of leadership of a team that you would want to share with our listeners today?
Well, man, I just got so excited for that question and to share this with you. If I do one of my keynotes is I'll share the high level. I'll give it to you in 30 seconds. I spent an hour on this, but if I could sum up my experience so far and what it takes to successfully lead a team, and this is really a team of any kind, I would sum it up in one word. And it's a word that's not commonly known or commonly used, and it's called Genshai. And Genshai. So I got this little. I got this from the founder of the Genshai Foundation. But genshai means this. It means to never treat another person in a manner that would make them feel small, including yourself.
I love that.
Genshai.
Never treat another person in a manner that would make them feel small, including yourself.
Yep.
That's powerful. It's so simplistic, but that's a great leadership concept. Ben, we've had an epic conversation. We've taken a long journey. You've gone deep with us, and I really am appreciative of it. If there's one thing you want to leave with people today, what would that be? And then let's tell people how they can connect with you if they want to work with your team and sales leadership, if they want to get your book, if they just want to connect with you and tell you thank you for sharing what you have done today.
Thank you. I would say what's coming to mind is lots of thoughts, but one clear thought I'm having is I would just tell you, you are not your thoughts. Just because you have a thought, that does not mean that it represents what you actually think and how you actually feel. And so you can reject thoughts that don't serve you, kind of like a bouncer that would like reject somebody that doesn't belong to a club. And I challenge you, those who are listening, to deploy this ant spray to the brain. So like to the automatic negative thoughts, the ants, the ANTS, deploy ant spray by using these 4 words. And you know these words. I reject that thought. And you can reject that thought. Use these words. It's like ant spray. If you have a thought and you're like, no, like I don't, that's not a thought I wanted to have. You don't have to receive that thought and be like, yeah, you can reject it. And do that by using those 4 words. Use it with emotion. Say it to yourself internally. If people are around you, just be like with emotion, like I reject that thought. And if you're by yourself, stand up and be like, I reject that thought. And the more emotion you put on it, the farther away that thought will fly out of your atmosphere.
I love it. That's powerful. Literally reject that thought. Ben, how can people connect with you, to work with you, or just learn more about what you're up to?
benward.com.
Well, that's pretty simple. I love it.
Case.
benward.com.
You can pick up my book there, benward.com. By the way, just I reject that thought. Chapter 4, what I just shared with you at the very closing is just again a little high level. I talk about that in chapter 4 on how to pluck the FUD. And you can get the book there, benward.com, plus check out all the other stuff I'm doing.
Perfect. Ben, it's been a pleasure, man, talking with you and sharing everything. I'm so grateful for the time that you've given to us. You've even gone over and given us a little extra time. I love your journey. I love what your openness and transparency. Your energy is infectious. And I'm so grateful for the time that we've had to share. So I appreciate you being with us today.
Extreme pleasure. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. For all of you who have stopped by, whether for a second or a minute or the entire time, I'm really grateful for you having been with us today on this edition of the Power Lunch. Please take the time to be kind to yourselves, be kind to others, show up as powerfully as you can, and as always, ever forward.